In this video, I'm going to show you how to work with two strands of yarn held together, otherwise referred to as double-stranded knitting. For the very basics about what double-stranding is, I'll also paste a link to my blog post that is a great introduction to this topic. I'm going to show you two examples. The first is where I will work with two strands of the same weight yarn in order to get a larger gauge. And in the second example, I'm going to work with two strands where one of the strands is a lace weight mohair, and so it doesn't really affect the overall gauge too much, but it gives a fabric that has some nice texture and can provide an interesting color aesthetic. So let's get started. In this first example, I'm taking two strands of sport weight yarn. This is Manos del Uruguay's Serena, and we will work them together. By double-stranding sport weight, I will wind up with a gauge that is in the worsted weight realm. When doing this, if your only goal is to create a larger gauge, you can use two strands of the same color. But if you also want a bit of color variegation, you can use two different colors and create what is called a marled effect. You can also play with using a solid color paired with a multicolor, and that also creates a really cool effect. I am working with two different colors here, but there's not a lot of contrast between the two, so my marled effect is going to be much more subtle. Here's a swatch that shows you what it looks like. So let's get started. I'm going to show you how I cast on when I'm double stranding. So I'm going to do the long tail cast on. So just like if I were single stranding it, I would need to estimate a long tail first. So first I want to line up my ends as best I can. And then I'm just going to treat this like it's one strand. So once they're lined up, I just want a little bit of a tail since I'm only casting on a few stitches here. And then I'm going to make my slip knot just like I typically would. Okay. I'll put the slip knot on the needle, and here's my long tail. So just like if it was a single strand, I'm going to work my long tail cast on. I'm just going to cast on a few stitches just for this demo. Okay, so here's the key with double stranding is you just need to keep in mind that one stitch has two strands associated with it. So this is one stitch, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's just an important note to keep in mind. And then when I go to knit, it's going to be the exact same thing. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm holding my two strands together like they're one. And then I will just knit like normal. And even if you had different kind of stitches, let's say you were instructed to do a yarn over and knit two together, you would do a yarn over just like you typically would. It's just that the two strands are together. And then let's say the next one is a knit two together. So you just have to keep in mind that even though I'm seeing 4 strands here, this is actually 2 stitches. So then I'm just going to go into both of these and knit them together. And I'll just knit that last stitch. So that's all there is to it. Now in my second example here, I have a skein of DK weight yarn. This is Manos del Uruguay's Milo in a variegated colorway. And I have a skein of lace weight mohair. And that's also Manos, it's their Cabrito yarn. When double stranding and one of the strands is like this very thin mohair, it doesn't affect the gauge in the same way as double stranding two lightweights like we did in the first example. Let me show you what it really does though. Here's a swatch of this Milo yarn single strand. It's a variegated yarn as you can see, and here it is when I double stranded it with the mohair. The gauge is very similar. The double-stranded one by my measurement was less than 1/4 of a stitch larger in gauge, but the real impact is on the fabric, as you can see. Look what the mohair did. First, it created some consistency in this variegated DK. Instead of having these blocks of color variation, it's like the dark gray smudged everything, and it created this just beautiful all over color effect. And in terms of the fabric, the mohair also filled in any of the gaps in the stitches, creating a fabric that just looks a bit more dense. Now, stranding with mohair isn't always this dramatic. If you were to pick a color of mohair that was super similar to the other strand, you would still get the fuzz factor, which helps fill in the stitches more and gives the fabric a bit more texture. But as you can see in this swatch, it doesn't have the same color impact. So this is a great option if you want more of a solid color look, but you want that interesting texture. I already have a little swatch going here with my DK and my lace mohair. So just like our first example, I'm just going to show you how I knit with it. And just like the first one, the key is really that you're just going to hold both of the strands. And as you can see, it's just they're both coming from each of their skeins. I'm just going to hold them together and treat them as one strand. And as I'm working these stitches, I'm just going to treat each of these as if they're one stitch. And it's a little bit easier than in the first example because the mohair is so thin, so it's not as confusing in terms of looking at how many stitches that you have. It sort of wraps itself around the other strand. But other than that, it's the same. And just like the other example, I'll do, let's say, a yarn over and knit two together. And I would do it the same as I typically would, just treating both of these strands as if they are one. I hope seeing both of these examples of double stranding has helped to demystify this technique a bit and has you excited to give double stranding a try. I have links below to a few of my double stranded projects that are all great patterns if you are new to this technique.